Strict conditions will be applied to this deal to make sure there isn't a dip in competition for consumers, no adverse impacts for consumers. That's the assurance Jim Chalmers is giving. Those conditions include things like maintaining regional branches for 3 years, a commitment for no net job losses from ANZ, and also a commitment to continue working with Australia Post to maintain the quite popular Bank at Post service that's run out of post offices around the country as well. Last year, the ACCC actually blocked this deal initially. That was a pretty significant call on their part because of concerns about competition. But that decision was eventually overturned by the Competition Tribunal. And that was partly because the tribunal was assured that there were competitors coming up to compete with the major banks, pointing particularly at Macquarie Bank, adding more competition to Australia's banking sector. That's what has allowed this deal to then proceed. Jim Chalmers says he's been considering this call for some time. He sought assurances from places like Treasury, Home Affairs, the input of the Financial Services Union, for example, and he's confident this deal can now proceed without setting a precedent for other major merger calls down the track. Here's a bit of what he had to say on this earlier this morning.
The conditions that I am proposing and imposing on the transaction are all about ensuring access to vital banking services, particularly in the regions, and also making sure that employees aren't left behind in this transaction. So today we are announcing that the ANZ acquisition of Suncorp Bank can go ahead, but subject to strict and legally enforceable conditions.
And Tom, the Treasurer says a second budget surplus remains on track.
Yeah, not a huge surprise, Dan. Of course, this was forecast back in the May budget initially. That forecast a surplus of $9.3 billion. Jim Chalmers is pointing to monthly figures out today that suggest that surplus remains on track and may be bigger than initially forecast. That's what these numbers are going to indicate. However, Jim Chalmers is saying don't read too much into the inflated figure itself. These things are going to jump around before the final budget outcome. That final budget surplus figure is revealed in a few months' time. He's keen to point to this second consecutive surplus as putting downward pressure on inflation and pointing to comments made by the Reserve Bank's governor suggesting budget surpluses do help in combating inflation, something he is sort of quite keen to press, but has also acknowledged this morning that the push to try and get inflation back below 3%, back into the Reserve Bank's target range to try and avoid further rate increases, is going to remain a challenge. But he says that is still the expectation of both the government and the Reserve Bank from previous forecasts.